everyone, thanks for joining us. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. Just gonna give everybody a minute to connect, okay? I'm Jackie from Hub City and I'm here with Christopher Swann. We're very excited to have him tonight. And yeah, I think that's everyone. All right, so I'm just gonna do a little bit of a bio for Chris. Again, I'm Jackie, and Christopher Swann is here to talk about his newest book, Never Turn Back. Christopher Swann is a graduate of Woodbury Forest School in Virginia. He earned a BA in English from Washington and Lee University, an MA in English and Creative Writing from the University of Missouri-Columbia, and a PhD in Creative Writing from Georgia State University. He lives with his wife and 2 sons in Atlanta. He is the English department chair at Holy Innocents Episcopal School. Shadow of the Lions, published in 2017 by Algonquin, was his debut novel. And we also had the pleasure of hosting him for that book, which was a wonderful experience. So thank you for joining us, Chris, and hope we have a really fun conversation tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks everybody for coming out on a Monday night. I think it's Monday. Yes. What day of the week is it? I don't know. I teach high school, so it's the first day of this week, so it must be Monday. So thank you all for coming out. Yeah, my newest book, Never Turn Back.
Love the cover.
I still love them. I wrote this. Like, my name's on it and everything. I hope I never lose that feeling. This is my second book, or second published book. It is the story of Ethan Faulkner, who is a young man who is a high school English teacher in Atlanta. And he is popular at school. He's got friends, good career. He even has a nice dog, Wilson, which is kind of remarkable because of his past. He survived a home invasion 10 years earlier. He and his sister were tragically and violently orphaned in one night and had to go live with their only remaining relative, their Uncle Gavin, who turns out is more and a little shady. And Ethan has turned his back on that and tried to move forward with his life. One problem is the last thing his father told him was, watch your sister. And his younger sister, Susanna, is a handful and doesn't like to be watched or have anybody keep tabs on her. And the beginning of the novel, I'm going to read a real short passage here near the beginning. Ethan's coming home on a Saturday morning. He's a little hungover and he feels a little embarrassed. He's coming home from a teachers conference in downtown Atlanta where he had a one-night stand with a conference attendee. And so he's heading home and finds his sister, Susanna, who's been gone for months, is in his house, and greets her. And then we have this little passage afterwards. Here he is going in the house.
Okay.
When I get my door open, my miniature dachshund is dancing on the carpet. Usually almost bowls me over as he runs out the front door to relieve himself on the front lawn. But today he barks at me twice, then turns and runs to the back of the house, then turns right into my bedroom, his paws scrabbling on the hardwood floor. He yips excitedly. Wilson, I call. The last thing I need is for him to pee all over my room. I drop my work bag and follow him. Wilson, come! I walk through the doorway of my bedroom and come to a dead stop. Wilson is prancing around at the foot of my bed like he's just treed a squirrel. A woman is lying on top of the covers, looking up at the ceiling, her hands clasped over her stomach. She's wearing jeans and has bare, filthy feet, and her short hair is a shade of magenta that doesn't exist anywhere in nature. You named your dog Wilson? She says, still looking at the ceiling. Wilson glances up at the bed, then back to me, a low whine in his throat. I reach down and rub his ears and get a rapid licking from a tiny, rough tongue in response. Good boy, I say. She sits up on her elbows to face me. You did not name him after the volleyball in Castaway, she says. Tom Hanks got an Oscar nomination for that, I say, still rubbing Wilson's ears. She laughs. Jesus, that's pathetic. I sigh and straighten up. Good to see you too, Susanna. Susie, she says. With that, Susanna hops off the bed. She's wearing a tight black t-shirt with the words "Get up the yard" slashed in white across the front. Got anything to eat? She says. I'm starving. And apparently shoeless, I say. My feet hurt. Plus I stepped in dog shit when I took Wilson outside for you. You're welcome. Where have you been, Susanna? It's Susie, she says. Seriously, I'm dying of hunger over here. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad to see my sister. It's just that her sudden reappearances can be jarring. She operates in her own timetable, rarely calls or emails, and disappears for months at a time. So seeing Suzanne in the flesh is the only confirmation I ever get that she's even alive. Whenever I'd complain about something Susanna had done, like taking my books from my bedroom without asking, or eating the last pack of peanut butter crackers in the pantry, Mom would commiserate, but she always ended those talks the same way. I know it's hard having a little sister, she would say in her Irish lilt, but she's your little sister, Ethan. She's the only one you've got. This was a refrain both of my parents often used to impress upon me the importance of being Susanna's big brother, the unique role I was to play in her life. But once she was old enough to ride a tricycle, Susanna came to feel insulted by the idea that she could possibly need me to protect her. I was inclined to agree. People who messed with Susanna were more likely to need me to protect them from her. When I was 12 and Susanna was 9, a budding bully in our neighborhood named Jake called my curly-haired sister Brillo Head. The next day, Jake was riding his bike, a red Diamondback Octane, when the brakes failed to work and he crashed into a utility pole, breaking his forearm and collarbone. When Jake's little brother told the rest of us in the cul-de-sac about Jake's accident, I looked at Susanna. She gave me a ghost of a smile only I could see. More chilling than that smile was the pair of needle-nose pliers I found sitting on my dresser that evening, the perfect tool for snipping a brake line on a bike. I put the pliers back where they belonged in the toolbox in our garage, but said nothing, partly because I couldn't prove anything, but also because I didn't want to upset Mom and Dad. Mom, because she would cry. Dad, because I didn't know how he would react. A year after the bike incident, we were orphans. So that's a little bit from the beginning. Gives you a sense of the brother and sister dynamic, and what their relationship, such as it is, has been like.
Yeah, that was really interesting to hear how it's like sums up a little bit about how he thinks of her and everything, right?
Thanks. Yeah, it's Susanna's she's the most complicated character I think I've written, and she was probably my favorite. I loved Ethan, who's the narrator of the story, and it's mostly his story, but it's also his sister's, and she took on a life of her own when I was writing her. I was talking to other writers about, it sounds a little insane, but you're writing this character because you're the one who makes them all up, yeah? So I had the scene with Susanna as a kid, and she and her brother are eating dinner. And in my head, Susanna's like, no. I'm like, yeah, you're gonna eat like I'm tired. She's like, no. I tried to force her to do the thing, and the scene didn't work. So I shrugged and okay. So I had her refuse to eat, and then the scene started working. And it sounds weird because these are not real people, and they're all in my head. But I heard her voice say, no, I'm not doing that. And she was kind of like that throughout the book. So whenever she shows up and she wants to do something, I just go, okay. And she's about the polar opposite of me in personality. So let her go. That's fine. So she was a blast to write.
What inspired her character?
I don't know. The first book I wrote, Shadow of the Lions, is set in a all-boys boarding school. And so there are a lot of male characters, and there are really only two female characters who, this main character's mom, who shows up only for a little bit, and then um, his ex-girlfriend. And tried to make her a pretty strong character because I wanted a strong female character in a book that was mostly, male characters.
Great.
And in writing this book, I wanted to keep doing that. And I've been surrounded by strong women my whole life. My mom, my wife, Kathy, my cousins. And I wanted her, she and Ethan have suffered through a little traumatic event in their childhood, and they've both reacted to it pretty differently. And Ethan has had a fairly healthy reaction, if that's the right term. But he's moved forward with his life, and he's trying to put together a decent life for himself. And Susanna has tried and has not succeeded anywhere near the same way Ethan has. So that was a deliberate choice on my part. Once I did that and said, I'm going to make her a strong character, then she just, again, sort of took a life of her own. She's not based on anybody I know. Maybe little bits and pieces from different people I do know, but at this point I couldn't even tell you. Yeah, she was, like I said, she was a blast to write. Hopefully she's going to come back in a future book. We'll see.
Oh, that's a good tip.
Yeah.
When did she start kind of talking back to you in the book? I'm curious.
Right at the beginning. Again, the very first scene I wrote with her was dinner. She's like, she refused to eat the peas. I'm like, she's supposed to eat like, it wasn't a big deal, but I got from like, yeah, you're going to eat the damn pea. Like, I'm the writer here. She's like, nope. And so I just shrugged and said, okay. Like I said, I tried to write it the way I wanted to write it, and that didn't work. And usually a lot of writers do that. You'll write a scene and go, huh, I didn't expect that to happen. My character did something I didn't expect. Usually it's kind of minor. She was like that from the very beginning. And once I listened to her and let her do whatever she wants, then the book writes itself. And a lot of it is Ethan's sort of a stand-in for me, I guess, in a way, although hopefully I'm less selfish than he is and I make slightly better choices in my life. But Ethan is basically trying to contain or deal with his sister, and she's somebody who doesn't want to be contained or handled in any way.
Is that why you chose first person for Ethan?
Yeah, I think I like first person. If I have a voice, I know it can limit you as a writer because then you've got everything's that one character's perspective. You're locked in. So if you don't make that character interesting, and a reader might not want to ride around inside that character's head for a while. But it worked. It also, and sometimes if that character is, they can only talk about things that they see or experience. That can be good for a crime story or any kind of mystery, because then you, the reader, are limited to what this character can see. And that can be useful if you're writing a mystery where you're trying to keep something, your main character's in the dark. Like when I was a kid, I read every Sherlock Holmes story. My grandfather gave me a collection of all of it, like all 52 short stories and 4 novels, and I inhaled the thing. I didn't always understand them, but I loved them and I kept rereading them. And almost all of them are told from, Watson's point of view as first person, and he doesn't understand what's going on all the time. And so I didn't feel too bad because I didn't know what was going on, but he didn't either. So I guess I thought it was all right. So I've liked playing with that and writing fiction.
Did you do that with your first book too? Was that also in first person?
I did. That was definitely, that was first person. That was a mystery set in, like I said, in a boarding school in Virginia where, again, past trauma. 2 boys who were roommates and best friends get in an argument. The main character, Matthias, has betrayed his buddy Fritz. And they get in an argument. Fritz turns around and runs away from his friend into the woods around the school. Matthias chases after him, loses him in the trees, and says, fine, I'll talk to him after dinner or whatever. But he doesn't. He never talks to him because he never comes back. He's gone. police, FBI, nobody can find him. And years later, Matthias goes back to the school for a teaching job and learns a couple things about his missing friend who's still been missing. There's been this big hole in his life. And he starts to dig, and it goes from there. So I took that same kind of voice or that same kind of structure and put it in this book. But I tried to make Ethan a different character, so it wasn't just the same. Like I didn't want to tell the same story again at all, and it's not in any way. But yeah, they are both first person. Yeah, they are both teachers, but the teaching part was a lot more important in the first book than it is in this one.
We did have a question from an audience member, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, please.
Trish asked, what comes to you first, the characters or the storyline?
Good question. And I usually ask that when I do events, when I go watch other authors. So I'm curious where they get their stories from. And my answer is a lot like many of theirs. It depends on the story. The Shadow of the Lions was the first novel I wrote, but it wasn't the first. Well, it was the first novel I published. Excuse me. It was not the first one I wrote. The first one I wrote is Underneath My Bed, and It Shall Stay There. It was. I'll describe it for you. Imagine a third-rate Pat Conroy wannabe. That's me. Writing a story of a working-class family, a father, son, fishermen, head-to-head. Set in the Georgia coast. The mother has just died of cancer. The Irish Republican Army is involved.
Wow, that sounds awesome.
Actually, the O and then nothing after that was exactly what the New York publishing world said. And I was looking at the faces. Some of the audience members are like,
"No, I want to know."
It didn't work. I mean, I literally had this in the mid. Part of it's set in Ireland. I went to Ireland. My wife called it a vacation. I called it research.
Nice.
And there's a scene where this old bedridden man, who's an old IRA member, is, I want to tell you what happened to your cousin, but first let me give you 10 pages of the troubles. And literally, I had him talk in a bad Irish accent about it just didn't work. But my wife read this thing. It didn't. It just. I was proud of it. I'm proud of some of the things I did with it because I learned. Okay, I can tell a novel length story. This one's not going to work. It's time to move to something else. And my wife said, "Why don't you try writing something you know? Like you went to boarding school. Why don't you do that?" And so for that, I resisted that for a while, and then I thought, well, actually, a boarding school could be a great place to set a story because anything can happen, especially if a school like that is rural. They're isolated, and you take 400 teenagers and stick them in a campus in the middle of nowhere. You're going to have drama no matter what. And so I came up with a setting, and then I came up with a character. I wanted to be the narrator to be somebody who'd gone to the school, who's gone back as a teacher, so they could kind of introduce you, the reader, to the place. But I didn't know what I wanted the story to be about. I wanted them to have some kind of dark past or something. And Kathy said to me, my wife, we were folding laundry or something on a Tuesday. And she said, you need with your book, you need to write a prologue where something dramatic happens. You should have somebody die, have a body in the first page. And I said, I was holding a shirt and I said, no, he doesn't die. He vanishes. She said, what? And I said, I have no idea. And I put the shirt down, I walked down the hall and I sat down and started writing the beginning of the book again. Okay. So that's where that, and I don't know where that came. Once I figured that out, the rest of the story just sort of unfolded for me. For Never Turn Back, that actually comes, there's a real life sort of family story. It's brief. I went to boarding school, like I said. And so this is something that happened to my family while I was away at school. We lived in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, right? So not a big city, but like a very large town at the time. And we lived in this nice cul-de-sac at the end of the street. And my dad was a banker for 35 years before he retired. And he had this unvarying schedule. He'd come home from work. He'd have a gin and tonic or two and have some Triscuits and cheese. and he'd watch the news till about 7:30 or 8. And then he'd go take an hour and a half, 2 hour nap, like a lie down, he called it. And then he'd get up and he'd have like 9:30 or 10 o'clock dinner with my mom. And then mom would go to bed and dad would stay up past midnight doing paperwork. Because of that, our house was the last one in our cul-de-sac to turn the lights off. So at midnight, every other house is dark but ours.
Right.
So one night around 11:30 or so, my dad's working, mom's gone to bed, dad's working, and he hears somebody running, he thinks running in the street. And that was real unusual at 11:30 at night in Winston-Salem. Like, no, who was running in the cul-de-sac? And then he realizes someone's running down the walk of our house. And then someone starts banging on the front door and ringing the doorbell frantically. And he goes and he opens the door, and this young woman's at the door saying, help me, they're chasing me, please let me in. And he looks in the yard and he looks in the street and doesn't see anybody. So he lets her in and calls my mother. Right? And then apparently my younger brother, who at the time was 8, he crept out to the top of the stairs and watched all this with his eyes getting big. They didn't realize until too late and sent him back to bed. But Dad said, let this woman in, got my mom, and then he turned the lights off outside the house. And he told me that, he's like, I don't know why I did that, because he was a creature of habit, and that was usually the very last thing he would do before he went to bed. He kept the lights on until he was going to bed, and he turned the lights off. It's the last thing he'd do before he'd go upstairs and go to bed. But he turned the lights off. He felt like he should. He and my mom take this young woman to the back of the house in the den, and they think she might be high as well as upset. They could something chemicals going on, not just nerves. But she tells some garbled story about having gotten in an argument with her boyfriend in his car with his friends, and they slowed the car down, opened the car door, and just shoved her out. And she went running down the street and turned into a cul-de-sac and saw the one house that had its lights on and went to it to get help. And that, my dad said, was when I heard a car turn into the cul-de-sac slowly, idling. It was loud, had a loud engine, like what my dad would have called a muscle car. And it came down to the circle and stopped almost directly outside of our house and sat there idling. This young woman starts freaking out. It's them. Oh my God, they're here. My parents like, shut up, keep quiet. And then the car slowly drove off into the night and vanished. My parents called the police. They came to pick up the young woman, who was not really happy about that. And she wasn't in trouble. My dad's like, I'm not taking you home, miss. I don't know who you are. And that was it. And that weekend, I called my parents from school, like I did every weekend. Mom said, well, we had a little excitement here, and told me the story. And my first thought was, well, I'm glad nobody's hurt. My second thought as a 16-year-old boy was, God, the most exciting thing to happen to my family, and I miss it. Great. Why wasn't I? When I thought about it, the story gets scary to me. What would have happened if Dad had kept the lights on? What if those men had realized that this woman had come to my parents' house? What if they'd gotten out of the car? What if they tried to come into my house? And that was the impetus for Never Turn Back. If something very like that happens, and that's not where, that was the first part that I wrote. It's not the beginning of the novel. It's had to restructure it and put it closer to the middle, but it's not too long. It's not too far into the book. But that is sort of a what if. And writers do that all the time. You take stuff from your own life and go, okay, what if this had happened differently? Okay, and then what would have happened because of that? And then because of that, you spin it out. So that's where Never Turn Back came from.
Incredible story.
It was I still kind of shake my head. I'm like, God, how I missed it. Man, it sounds like that was like I missed a ride at an amusement park. I'm like, no, it was somebody who was frantic. And I don't know how, seriously in trouble this young woman was or what happened to her afterwards. But yeah, it doesn't sound like her boyfriend and his friends were, the kind of people you'd want to invite in your house, especially not at like midnight. So.
No, she was running from him like that. Goodness.
No. So
Um, we have a question from Becky too, if you don't mind.
absolutely.
Um, she asked if you would talk about where and how the mysteries come to you. Do you know the end point, or do you follow the journey through the characters? She said she loved unraveling the story in the Shadow of the Lion.
Thanks. I'll tell you a secret about Shadow of the Lions. In the prologue, it opens up with a roommate Fritz runs off into the woods, and then he's gone. And I didn't want them to find him dead at the beginning of the book, because then it'd be a murder mystery, and I didn't really want to write a murder mystery. I thought it'd be more. Part of it was because that was my first book, and I didn't want to write. I wouldn't say I had to write something unique or anything like that, but I didn't want to write a murder mystery because I was afraid that I'd do something kind of familiar and conventional. And plus, when somebody dies, there are rituals we have and follow. Like, we know how to deal with that kind of grief. There's nothing like that at all if somebody just vanishes. And something like 800,000 people go missing in the United States every year. The vast majority of them get back home within a year. They've just run away, but a very large percentage of them don't.
Wow.
So I knew that was going to be my story, but I didn't know what had happened to Fritz. And I didn't care. I figured I'll just figure it out as I write, kind of like you figure out a mystery while you're reading. It turns out that, at least for me, that's a terrible way to write a mystery. I realized about a quarter of the way through the book, like, okay, I got to figure out what happened to him first. I had an idea, but then I just stopped writing and said, okay, and then like plotted it out. Okay, what happened? All right. What is Matthias is going to poke around years later? What does he find out? How does he find that out? Okay. Once I knew what had happened to Fritz and how much I wanted Matthias to find out, those are sort of my two lighthouses, and I just aimed for them, and everything else I could make up in between. Never Turn Back. I plotted a little bit more and organized it a little bit more. But I don't like, I'll put it this way. If you're going to write a mystery, there are two main ways mysteries fail. It's either, oh, the butler did it? How surprising. I figured that out in page 50, but I read the next 300 pages in the vain hope that something exciting would happen. Thank you for ruining my weekend.
Oh.
Or you're like, you get to the end, you're like, aliens took them? That, what? Either it's completely, you figured it out really early on. It's very predictable. Or it's like the author's like, I don't know what to do, aliens. And I wanted to avoid those two extremes. And I was worried that if I plotted it out too well or too rigidly, I was afraid I'd leave the traces of that in the book, and it'd be really easy for a reader to see. You don't want to cheat if you're coming up with a mystery. When you read a really good mystery, you get to the end, you're like, I didn't see that coming, but that makes perfect sense. You're like, oh. So I wanted to get that. So hopefully I've done that in both of these books, especially in Never Turn Back. And I've gotten some good feedback that people are like, I didn't see the ending coming. That was great. So fingers crossed. But you want to do that. But mostly, I kind of figure out the main points, but then it's got to be the characters. You have to have good characters, because there are only so many plots in the world, but every character is unique, just like every human being is unique. And if we don't care about the characters, then we'll get tired of the story. If you don't really care, if you don't care to follow the characters around and see what happens to them and hope, like, God, I hope he's okay. I hope she makes it. I hope he dies, or whatever, depending on what you want. Then it could be a great plot, but if it's got characters you don't care about. Quick analogy: in college, I had to write. I love Shakespeare. I was an English major. Big surprise. And I took a class, Shakespeare on film. We read 6 Shakespeare plays and watched 2 movie versions of each. And one of them was Romeo and Juliet. We watched this famous Franco Zeffirelli version from the 60s that a lot of people have seen in school. It's beautiful and traditional. And we saw another one that was made, I think, a little bit later, and it was all in Italian. And so it had subtitles. I'm like, fine. But the actor playing Romeo was like 35, and we all hated him. Like, we're all going, oh my, like, he was completely like not convincing, and everything else was good, but Romeo was horrible. Like, Romeo dies, sorry to spoil it for you, but when Romeo died, we all cheered. Like, we were like, I don't care. Like, this is, and we were English majors who liked Shakespeare. So I can only imagine what like the general audience who maybe just like, okay, I'll go watch this would have thought. If you don't care about the characters, it doesn't matter how good the story is, you're going to be less likely to get engaged. So I try to come up with a decent mystery, but then I got to make sure the characters are good so you follow them.
Like you want to be right on the edge of figuring it out at the end, so that when the ending comes, you're like, oh yeah, okay.
And it's a if you're like, oh my god, like we were watching, you know, in the pandemic, you know, we've been home a lot, and I've got 2 teenage boys. So my wife, Kathy, and I are like, what do we do? And we're like, I mean, we're very fortunate. You know, knock on wood, we had none of us has gotten sick. We've got enough room in our house we can kind of spread out and do our own thing. But we're like, let's have movie night. Like, let's get together. Let's at least once or twice a week. Let's do something. Because we were stuck at home anyway, and so we started watching a lot of movies that, you know, are old to them, but that Kathy and I are like, oh yeah, why don't we do this? Well, one of them we pulled up was The Usual Suspects, and from the 90s, and that's got one of the great twist endings of all time. And I still remember seeing it for the first time where you're like seconds away from the end of the movie, or like a minute away, and suddenly you're like, oh wait, you mean like and you figure it out. It's okay to figure it out then. Mm-hmm. It's if you figured it out an hour earlier,
right?
And there's no suspense. But and also with that movie, no one really remembers the plot very well. The plot doesn't really matter. You remember the characters. And you remember the actors who played. You remember the characters. You remember the big surprise twist at the end, which I won't say here in case anybody here has not seen the movie. But that's sort of what you want when you're writing a good mystery story.
How long did it take you from like when you got the idea for it to when you finished, and then like the publication process for you? How long did that take?
Oh man. So I wrote my first book, and that was probably 2 to 3 years from beginning to end. And so that got bought in 2014. It didn't come out until 2017 because Algonquin was a smaller press, and they only put out so many books a year. So I had to wait. I thought, I've got all this time. I can write this book. It's the next book. And then I would keep blowing it off. And then I would get, well, could you revise this scene from Shadow? Okay, so I had to go back and do that, and all that was fine. And then, somebody wants to interview you. I'm like, oh, I have to do an interview. And then the reception for Shadow was really, really great. It was beyond my wildest expectations. And I'm like, look, I'm an officially published author. I have an agent, which is this magical unicorn that writers spend years trying to get. And I had one. I had a publisher, right? I got nominated for awards. My novel got reviewed in the New York Times Book Review. I got to go to the writers only private party at the Decatur Book Festival, y'all. I'd arrived. And none of that means anything when you sit down to write the next book. And you're like, nah. I mean, it means something that you know that you can do it, mm-hmm. But then you have this pressure. Okay, well, I've got to do it, but I've got to do it at least as well or better. And if you Google, don't go do it now, but if you go Google second novel, the first 3 things that come up are, well, you'll get the sophomore novel, second novel syndrome, and the curse of the second novel. Like the sophomore effort of any artist of any kind, it's an album, a movie, a book, often there's a lot of pressure. can we do this? And it felt, I loved writing it, but then I put a lot of pressure on myself. And then I made the cardinal mistake of, when I had a full draft, I did not listen to Kathy, my wife, who reads everything I write, and said, I think this middle part, you've got this big long flashback scene. It's like 50 or 60 pages. I think it slows everything down. And I was like, no, it's great. It'll be fine. I wrote Shadow of the Lions. It'll be okay. So we sent the thing out, and everybody said, this is really, I really like this, yada, yada, and no.
Aww.
And they were right to. So a little humble, but what it ended up doing is it led me to Crooked Lane Books, where I am now, and my editor, Jenny Chen, who's amazing. And she saw this and said, yeah, you need to cut this down, but keep this and redistribute it this way. And she was really good at helping me organize it all. But it's hard. The second book, it's hard. And I've talked to other authors who are like, yeah, that's a nice thing about I know there must be jerks out there in the writing community, but every author I've met has been so kind and generous and supportive and giving of their time and advice, mostly because they're like, yeah, we've been there, or we're still there, and we know. Writers, when you get these blurbs in books, like I've got this, I love this twisty, sexy, fast-paced thriller. That's from Jocelyn Jackson. That's in the front of my book. When you see those, I'm like, okay, so I asked my publisher, so like, when do you all go, how do you all go get blurbs? And like, no, how do you go get them? I'm like, what do you mean me? I'm like, you. So you have to go, it's excruciating. You have to be like, hi, I don't know you, but I follow you on Goodreads, and I really like your books. Could I send you a copy of my book? And would you mind reading it? And if you like it, would you say something nice about it? And it's like cold calling. And every person I approached to write a blurb said yes, except for one like former professor, a writer, and a former professor of mine. And she said no, because she said, I would love to, but I'm so busy. I know that if you send it to me, it'll just sit in a stack and I'll forget about it. And I don't want to do that to you. And I appreciated that. It was honest. And she was real supportive. She's like, and I'll buy a copy when it comes out or whatever. And I was like, I don't care, but thank you. But yeah, I mean, all writers are, they're a great community, and I'm real lucky to be part of it. So that's been humbling and also really, really rewarding. I like that as much as anything that has happened as a result of me getting published.
Have you had any return to you for blurbs?
I have. I wrote a blurb for Brian Panowich, who's become a good friend. He wrote this great book called Bull Mountain, and he wrote a sequel called Like Lions.
Yep.
And he was actually, it tells a funny, he heard about my book, Shadow of the Lions. His agent said, there's some other Georgia author that's got this book with lions in the title. And Brian's like this ex-firefighter, big, tall guy. And he's like, I'm gonna read who's this guy? I hate this stupid book, Shadow of the Lions. I bet it's horrible. And he said he read it, and he's like, this is actually pretty good. And I met him at a festival. We were gonna be in a panel together, and he showed up out of nowhere. And like he was a little bit late or something, or maybe I was just early. And suddenly this huge guy with this ball cap on shows up and goes, I read your book. And he's stalking it towards me. I'm like, he's either going to hug me or punch me. And thankfully, he shook my hand and hugged me later. But I wrote a blurb for him for his second book. And I wrote one for Christine Anderson, who wrote a great book her first book called Crooked Truth, won the Farrell Sams Award. It's put up by Mercer University Press. So that's been bizarre, but I was very, very happy to do it. So
I'm sure that's, why others are so easy, willing to do it too. They remember, asking.
They still have to go, and they all have to go do it. And it's just awkward if you go, and then it's like, I want to ask my friend, like, I don't want to keep asking the same people. I don't want to bother my friends. I'm like, guys. And so there's a delicate dance with that, but yeah.
You had a lot of great ones for this one because I was using them for the event pages and things that I was writing, and I was like, "There's so many to choose from. This is great."
Jocelyn Jackson, who I met, and Brian blurbed it. I got JT Ellison,
Oh,
who's a
great.
fantastic thriller writer. I was like, okay, I'm, Emily Carpenter,
Mhm.
who's the queen of Southern Gothic fiction, like and I've met these people and I know them in real life now. And um, that's, like I said, that's one of the greatest things with this whole publishing gig is I've met a lot of amazing people. So.
There was a question kind of about that from Becky. You kind of we talked about this before we got on the air, but are you still working full time as a teacher or part time? And when do you find the time to write?
Full time. It's funny because my colleagues were like, beginning of the school year, they're like, "What are you doing here? Didn't you write a book?" I'm like, "Yeah, you have a highly romanticized view of publishing in the 21st century." Okay, the money I made on Shadow of the Lions, I was able to put hardwood floors in my bedroom and save a little money, and it was nice, but it's not like you write a book and go, well, I guess I'm gonna go retire to Hilton Head now. Maybe I'll write another book. So I do teach full time, but this is my 25th year of teaching at Holy Innocents Episcopal School. It started when I was 12, and it's
You're wondering.
I'm really fortunate and they're very supportive. And some private schools, so I have relatively small classes. Um, I have, and my summers are free, so I try to get a big chunk of writing done in the summers, and then during the school year, I can, working at a slower pace. And I write at night. I used to try to get up really early in the morning because I like mornings, but I have to have my coffee and have something to eat.
Mhm.
And by the time I do that, and I wake up and I'm, mentally capable of doing anything, it's time to go to work. So once we had kids, I wasn't sleeping much at night anyway. So I just started writing at night. It just worked. So I do that. I heard good advice I heard about years ago was aim for 2 pages a day. And if you don't do it today, that's fine. Don't try to do 4 the next day. Just aim for 2. And some days you'll get 2. Some days you'll get 1. Some days you'll get 8. But if you just aim for that 2 pages, like that's doable. I could probably do that. Then that also doesn't seem overwhelming. And I found that to be kind of a useful goal when I'm really in it. So yeah. Otherwise, you just not needing to sleep would probably be helpful. But I do manage to sleep and teach. But again, I'm lucky because I'm able to teach at a school that's very supportive, and I'm teaching classes I've taught before for the most part, and so I'm able to budget my time that way.
It probably helps not to have too big of a goal every day because you want it to still be kind of fun, especially if you have a day, a full-time job.
Sure. I mean, I think most writers, especially male writers, my generation, we grew up with like the ghost of Hemingway sort of sitting over our shoulder, and so we'd read him and read his advice. And one of the things he talked about was don't leave something in the tank. I think was his saying. Don't stop. Don't stay up late and okay, now I'm all done. And he's like, leave a little bit in the well. It'll slowly fill back up, but leave a little bit. Like stop a scene. Okay, I'm done for the day. So when you come back to it, you're like, okay, now I, sort of build up your anticipation. And I've done that and I've found that to be helpful because then I can go away and I'll think about it in the back of my head and I'll come back to it and I have I think a better, different way to do it than I had originally planned. So that works for me anyway.
Are you working on anything right now?
I finished about 2 weeks ago. I finished a draft of a third novel and mailed that off to my editor, who has it now.
Awesome.
And so we'll see what she says. It's a standalone, but the once I go through that, the next book I've got planned actually would be a sequel to Never Turn Back, and it'd be more about Susie. So
That was the hint you gave us, right?
yeah. So that I've started. I've outlined some of that. People had asked me when I finished Shadow, they're like, "So what happened? Is your next book a sequel?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Well, what happened?" I'm like, "You need to write a sequel to Shadow of the Lions." I'm like, "No," like that had never crossed. I'm like, "No." I mean, I'm done with that. Like I wrote the story, and they're like, "But we need to know what happens to them." I'm like, I don't know what happens to them afterwards. Go. I had smart aleck, like, why don't you write some fan fiction or whatever? But I was like, I don't like. It just surprised me. I hadn't even thought about it. This one I did because again, it's Ethan's story with his sister, but I wanted to do something more with his sister, so she's going to have her own story come up in the future. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see what my editor says.
Looking forward to it, though.
Thanks.
Trish asked what type of research you do for your novels.
The internet is a wonderful thing, and it's easy because Kathy will walk by something. She's like, "What are you doing?" And she'll look at what I'm like, research, and I am, but I'll research them. She's like, why are you looking at a street map of Decatur, Georgia? I'm like, I'm trying to figure out where this scene could take place or whatever. Something I really enjoyed, I have a coworker who just retired. Her husband's a criminal defense attorney, and so I said, "Can I interview David?" I had to ask him some questions. She's like, "What?" I said, "About like drug laws and bail money and how that works." And she looked at me, and I was like, "It's research for a book. I swear to God." And I did, and I thanked him, and credits for a Shadow. Of course, the internet can be a huge time suck. So if I do it, I have to go in and go, okay, what am I looking for? Okay. And at some point you have to be, okay, that's all I need. But I like writing things, with this novel and the sequel, I have it set here in Atlanta. And Atlanta is a great city, and it's a huge city, and it's got so many different neighborhoods and such history that I can. And a lot of people in Atlanta, everybody drives. Like nobody, unless you live in certain places like Decatur, where people actually walk around. They can walk from their house to the grocery store, normally do, and they'll go to their work or whatever. Or they can walk to school. Everybody here in Atlanta drives. And so we have this sort of, you live in your neighborhood, like where I live in Sandy Springs. It's this nice residential area north of Atlanta, north of Buckhead, and we've got a public park and a public golf course right down the street, and I've got Publix, dry cleaners, restaurants, everything around me that I could need. You go 10 miles due south, and you're in English Avenue and Vine City, which are just west of downtown Atlanta. And 10 years ago, those neighborhoods were basically like an open air heroin market. Like you did not go there. Nobody went there. There's been urban renewal, a lot of things happening to that part of town that have built it back up. And there are families who live there. It is a community, but it was just not a great community. And that's just 10 miles south of here. It's not that far away. It's the same city. But I will do research. I'll drive around. I use Google Maps. Has been great. I'm like, what did that play? My next novel set in Western North Carolina in Cashers, where my grandparents lived for 50 years. And so I know that area pretty well, but I'm like, what is the name of is there a road that goes, I could just make it up, but let me go look. And, okay. I could do that. So if a local's like, no, you couldn't drive past, Whiteside. Yeah, you can. I found the roads right there. That I find to be fun because the research, even if I make stuff up, when I do research, it gives me ideas for, I could try this, I could do that. So.
Was there anyone else that you had to interview for this book besides the detective?
No, my friend's husband, who's an attorney, I did that for Shadow. For this book, no, I didn't. I'm trying to think if I had to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
No, I did do a lot of research on, again, city of Atlanta, like maps, neighborhoods.
Okay.
And I did some research on mental illness. My wife, Kathy's a psychologist, so sometimes I'd ask her, but I try not to, because I know that can get kind of annoying. Be kind of like if people like, you're an English teacher, tell me about, what's the difference between present, past, participle, kind of out of nowhere. Like that's, okay. So I try not to do that to my wife too much. But I did read about, what's a psychopath, what's a sociopath, what's a range, because I had some characters that I wanted to play with like that. But yeah, so this book, no, I didn't have to talk to anybody. And I'm kind of shy, and that's like, I'd feel like I was bothering somebody if I went to interview them. It's a lot easier to just look it up online.
I'm glad you're able to find most of it, and Atlanta is such a rich city that I'm sure there's a lot of options for places to look up things.
There's a lot of stuff here, and it's a great place to write. I like writing crime fiction because crime is something that affects everybody, any kind of demographic, and you can tell a lot about characters and how they react to crime. And if you want to, you can use crime as a way to kind of investigate a neighborhood or a city or a society. Not that I'm a sociologist or that I would write a crime novel exactly that way, but you learn a lot of things about, if you have to go explore, if you have to go investigate a crime, if you have a character who's a law enforcement official or a private investigator or just an ordinary citizen, you start asking questions. And think about how many mysteries you've read or seen on TV or in the movies where people start poking around and asking questions. Well, they start uncovering things that maybe they shouldn't have, or they find answers they weren't prepared for. They start learning things that they weren't expecting to learn. I like having, you can do that in a small town too, but I liked, I live here and I've lived here for many years. And so there's a lot going on in the city. So I'm going to use it for now. Not for every place and everything I plan to write, but yeah, for a while.
You said, I didn't want to forget this part. We don't have any other audience questions at the moment. You said you had a story about the audiobook.
Oh yeah. So when Shadow came out, my editor said, hey, we need to choose a narrator for the audiobook. I'm like, I'm getting an audiobook? She's like, yeah. So I got to listen to, they'd gotten two narrators, two professional audiobook readers to read the prologue of Shadow of the Lions, and they sent it to me. And so I took a free period in my classroom and listened to two different voice actors reading the opening of my book, which is one of the more pleasantly surreal experiences I'd had. When Never Turn Back was coming out, my editor said, okay, we're going to have an audiobook, but we don't have anybody who's like auditioned or like read for it, but you can hear some people. We're going to use this company, and here's some of the people who they've used. And so I would go listen to some audiobook, some narrators reading from other books, samples that are online. And nobody was really doing it for me. And I mean, they were fine. I was like, nah, I didn't. And Kathy said, what about asking Axe? We have a friend, Axe Norman, and that's what he goes by, Axe. He goes by that professionally too. He is an actor and he is a narrator. If you go to the Empire State Building and take the tour, his voice is what you hear on the audio tour.
Okay.
He's done lots of commercials. He's done lots of things like that as well. I forgot, there's some other big site that he's the voice for. So anyway, I reached out to him because we know him. He's a great voice, and we went to college together. And he said, Chris, I don't do lots of fiction because I don't do a lot of voice work. Like I don't take on like voices of different people. He said, but if you send me your book, I'll give it extra special care. Oh. So you listen to the audiobook of Never Turn Back. The narrator's Axe Norman, my college classmate. So that was pretty cool to get somebody that I knew and respected as a friend to do it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it was very cool.
I have to look him up now. I don't remember his name, doesn't strike a bell, but that sounds really, really fun.
It was fun. It was cool.
Uh, we had a comment from Susan. She said, I love Shadow of the Lions, which I bought when I met you at Delicious Reads here in town. She said, I'm so happy there are other books coming, and I look forward to reading this one and others. So
Oh,
I
thank
think you
you
have,
so much, Susan. I appreciate that. Yeah, Delicious Reads was fun. I had no idea what that would be like. Um, so I showed up, and I'm still kind of naive and a little. I'm not quite as golly gee whiz as I was when I first went on book tour. And book tour now is a very different thing. It's virtual. The world being the way it is. Maybe next year. Maybe when the paperback Never Turn Back comes out, I can actually drive around and go up to bookstores again.
we'd
But
love to have you.
yeah, well, thank you. But I did Delicious Reads, and I, showed up, and I know Patty Callahan Henry, and she was one of the first writers I saw there, and she's wonderful, and she's so kind, and um, she's like, "Do you know any of these people?" I'm like, "No, but I'd really like to." So like, I met all these folks, and um, yeah, it was like speed. It was kind of like speed dating, except you're like table to table, and all these people, and everyone's drinking champagne. So by like an hour in, they're like, "Okay, so tell me about your book. Is this a mystery?" It was a lot of fun. I was like, I got to be careful. I'm gonna have the one glass, um, and it was a blast. And people were so fun, and I thought it was going to be kind of harrowing describing my book over and over to different groups of people. It was great. So Susan, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed Shadow, and I hope that you enjoy Never Turn Back. And yeah, I'm going to keep doing this as long as people will buy them, because I've wanted to be a writer since I was 13, and I usually say that, I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, but I was 13 a long time ago. So it took a while, but I'm here, and I'm going to keep doing it, um, because I love writing stories, and I love uh, puzzling them out and making them work. So, knock on wood, I'm going to keep doing this as long as I can.
Well, thank you so much. I love having your books in the shop, and we've had a few people come by looking for them. So I really hope that we get to see you for the next one.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, and thank you everyone for coming. I think we're going to wrap it up for the evening, but Chris, you've been absolutely wonderful to talk to, and audience, you've had some great questions, so thank you.
Thank you so much. And before I leave, I want to do my 1 minute evangelization of indie bookstores. I would love, of course, everybody to buy a copy of my book. But if you don't buy a copy of my book, please consider supporting Hub City somehow. The indie bookstores, like everywhere else, everyone's been hit by this pandemic, but indie bookstores thrive on having they provide a forum for customers to come in. There's a community, and that community is now moved online. And yes, you can go into the stores, you can visit, but it's harder. Um, and all of us have made great use in the past months of, an online retailer named after a South American river. All of us have, and they have their place, and it's great. But the guy who runs that doesn't need your $26.99 for the price of a new book, where the indie bookstores do. Where when I was on tour with my first book, I was at Park Road Books in Charlotte. I got there early for my reading, and so I was just browsing the shelves. A customer walked in, and a bookseller said, "Hi, can I help you?" And I could overhear this, and the woman said, "Yeah, I'm looking for something like Gone Girl, but a little less dark and with characters I might actually like." And I started laughing because I'd read Gone Girl and it was dark. And by the end of it, I hated all the characters in it. They were all kind of despicable in many ways. It was a great book, but I just was like, And the bookseller didn't bat an eye. She said, "Okay, I've got 3 suggestions. Come on." I'm like, that's why we need these folks,
Oh,
because they know books and they help us find the books that we want to read. And they suggest books to us that we may never have found. So, like I said, I love everybody to buy a copy of my book, but if you don't, please support Hub City in some other fashion.
thank
Uh,
you.
and thank you. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate the questions. It was fun talking to y'all, and I hope to see y'all in real life sometime in the not too distant future.
I hope so. And we do have the beautiful signed copies of Chris's book. So yes, please do think of supporting us, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thanks, y'all. Y'all have a good night.
All right, you too. Bye.